I think Pippen was probably not. Obviously, he wasn't Jordan, but I think he could have won a title with the Bulls given a long enough run. But he certainly wouldn't have won 6.
No.
Yeah,
if you were the Bulls coach at that time, how much free rein do you think you would have given someone like Michael Jordan in terms of off the court, the way his behaviour was almost alienating quite a lot of people, as we've discussed, but he was able to back it up with what he was doing on the court. Do you think you would just have to let that happen and just let that flow for the overall good?
I mean, the question is, how much control can you exert on Jordan while still keeping him against Michael Jordan? Because there was something more than just his physical gifts that had this aura around the league where he was unbeatable, right? So he missed plenty of game-winning shots. He missed plenty of clutch free throws. But for some reason, nothing stuck except his ability to win. I mean, he hit more than he missed. But in terms of whatever that edge he needed to play with was, you don't want to blunt that. You just want to create a team which is robust enough to withstand that knife constantly being stabbed. Within internally as well as externally. So the knife is sharp no matter what. So, you don't want to blunt the knife because you do need to stab other people with it. Basically.
Wow.
Yeah, basically.
It's a good way of looking at it. It's definitely a very, very good way of looking at it.
Yeah, definitely.
So I suppose the conversation would be like, how much can you do? So like one of the famous, it wasn't in the doc, but one of the things when Phil took over was like, no NBA scoring leader had also won a championship in the same year. So no player before Jordan had led the league in scoring and won the NBA title. And Jordan changed that, right? So Jordan, the conversation Phil had, and they kind of touched on it in the doc, was, look, you're going to have to average less points a game. You're going to have to give some more to the team. And I think at the time he was averaging like 33 a game. So he looked at the stats and he said, well, I can still average 30 and still lead the league in scoring. So that's enough. So you have to have that conversation because he knew just what a weapon Jordan was. So you can't blunt him too much. But you have victims as a result because some people do get stabbed, even if you have a knife. Do you know what I mean? And I think there are victims in that team. There's victims in that team like Scotty, for example. That moment of Scotty's failure of going back into the game wasn't him just doing that then. That was a build-up of the 8 years of everything, being in the shadow of Jordan and then finally thinking he had his moment in the light and Phil not choosing him.
Yeah.
That's tough. That's tough, man. And I don't think Scotty's ever really recovered from that. And you see it. He's not out here promoting the doc.
True.
Exactly. Yeah.
So how would a character like Dennis Rodman be handled from a senior perspective? Because he just seems he's just like a complete loose cannon. Like there's one thing about trying to rein in Michael Jordan, but trying to keep Dennis Rodman in line, that's not an enviable task.
I don't think would you want to? Would you really want to?
That's the thing. One thing I remember, I don't know if you guys remember, like Ferguson said that similar thing about Barthez, right? I don't know if you guys remember when Fabian Barthez joined United. I think he was the only guy who didn't have the curfew.
Okay.
Is that Barthez, the French goalkeeper?
Yeah, the keeper.
Yeah, Fabian Barthez.
I don't know if you can get the Googling done. I think it was something similar. Like he basically was like, no, I can't have I have to be able to do what I do. And the great, kind of managers like Fergie and Phil, they have a sense of these things, I think. I think they have a sense of what's controllable and what's not. But Rodman, there's two things. So if you're trying to win a title, you obviously can't control him. So when he says he needs a holiday in season, you can't control him. But Phil somehow was able to forgive him. Accepting people on their own terms, I suppose, is what you say, and making the team understand to accept him on his own terms. But that maybe doesn't happen if he doesn't allow him to have the holiday earlier in the year and somehow doesn't see it as he just needs to party, but sees it as a potential cry for help. I mean, if Rodman, if I suppose the question becomes is like, as a leader or as a manager, like, what's your responsibility? Is there anything more than winning? Because if it's just winning, I think he did the right thing because they won, right? All's well that ends well. But if you thought about Rodman's life, sort of interventions he may have required to deal with his, mental health stuff and addiction stuff, post-career as well, then maybe you should have taken a different route. But I think if you in the moment, if you're trying to win, I think that was probably the only thing he could do, I suppose.
I suppose the short-term responsibility of let's just keep him well for the time being, that's, as a coach, that's really what you have to prioritise, isn't it? And then let the doctors and the mental health specialists take over after that.
So I'd be interested to hear you guys, from a football perspective, someone like Gaza, right? Mm-hmm. So he clearly would have encountered people that during his kind of short but magical, playing career would have enabled him to do the same kind of stuff. But he never recovered. Whereas Rodman, still played, but post that 98, he just couldn't find. He signed with the Lakers, he got let go. He played a little bit of time with San Antonio, all kind of great organizations, and none of them he was able to stick it out, basically. So it potentially ruined the end of his career, but he did win 5 championships, 2 with Detroit and 2 with the Bulls. So I don't know. I don't know if these kind of managers or leaders as teams, we have a greater responsibility to save people, so to speak. But if Gaza would have gone to United when he had the chance, in principle, and someone like Fergie could have provided just enough structure for the madness, would that, you think, would be something like Jordan with Phil, where, without Phil, Rodman by the end of his career, just washed out everywhere he went, and there were great organizations like the Lakers and the San Antonio Spurs, great organizations. They just didn't have that special manager, leader, coach, like a Phil or a...
My interest in The Last Dance was slightly more sparked by knowing Phil Jackson was in the documentary.
Yes.
And because those characters, the organizers, the leaders, the management, they were the things that makes me interested in sports, and particularly this documentary. And I'm a Liverpool fan, but in terms of management, in terms of being able to build a team, reconstruct teams, make teams win, Alex Ferguson all the way for me is the creme of managers. Mm-hmm. He's the best at it.
Yeah, I think so. And I'm a United fan, so obviously But
he's the one who, that's the one you'd look to, for me, you'd replicate in terms of management. And that's the benchmark. Alex Ferguson is the benchmark because he seems to have a full understanding of what goes in the club, what goes on in the club, his players, the type of players he wants to play for the club, and the values of the club. He seems to me as someone who has very tight values and he manages that way. Mm-hmm. And he will mold his players according to what he needs from them.
And he always seemed to let players go at the right time if he knew that it was going to upset the dressing room to sort of keep them around. It was always the team. The team came first.
I mean, you say that. I think there's 2 things to that, right? So, like, if you take someone like Pep, or if you take Phil Jackson, or a guy who's or there's probably a million kind of tactical geniuses involved in all these sports, that know the X's and O's in and out as well. Or Pep being an example, I suppose, of the best kind of X's and O's guy when it comes to football, just having the sport to a science, essentially. And the success he gives. Fergie's ability to kind of have enough of the X's and O's, or having the know-how to have a guy like, what was the Portuguese guy's name? Queiroz?
Carlos,
exactly. Other guys who are technical experts or tactical experts, but the team building aspect, sustainably. So you're not gonna hit on every point. So, for example, for me as a United fan, I think the way Fergie treated Roy Keane was terrible. I mean, absolutely terrible, right? And so you're not going to hit every mark. You're not going to be right every single time. But I think the guys like Fergie and Phil Jackson and these guys, they're right more often than they're not. Mm-hmm. And someone like Klopp will be probably something similar like that. If he's able to have a sustained run now with Liverpool, where he's able to build a Klopp culture, and say what Liverpool do in the next 10 years, say they win 5 titles, say, or 6 titles under him, then I think that will again show that, Klopp didn't hit every mark necessarily, but we'll be able to judge that his instincts for, selling the guy at the right time are correct. And I think Phil...
Yeah, definitely. So in terms of you going into coaching, let's say you're looking to build almost a Bulls-like dynasty that can, like, how would you go about not only building a successful team, but keeping them dominant for so long, like the Bulls team, like that Man United team?
Yeah.
What is the secret to that?
Like, how you incentivize it, right? So, like in football, we don't have a salary cap. So I'd try and find the Russian oligarch or the Arab, money. Example where there is some sort of equalizing salary cap. First and foremost, we can harp on about Phil Jackson and leadership and everything else, but without Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant, Phil didn't win a single title either. Mm-hmm. So, we can talk about the system of the triangle that he found, which I think the documentary touched on earlier, which is a tactical element, I suppose, like Pep has, which maximizes the role players essentially. But you need the horses to begin with. Yeah. So if you give me the horses, then you can start to think about. Same with United, right? So unless the class of '92 doesn't happen, mm-hmm. which realistically the stars had to align for Fergie there,
Yeah.
Or Phil Jackson,
that was. So I suppose at the heart of that, the whole Bulls dynasty then is Jerry Krause, the general manager,
and luck.
Mm-hmm.
So you think about they did a very good. Some things that Jerry Krause did, which were unbelievable, was he drafted really well, and he drafted really well in the sense of he drafted Scottie Pippen, he drafted Horace Grant, mm-hmm. and I think Horace didn't get enough credit in that actual series because I think he was actually better than Rodman was for the second three-peat as a power forward. So he drafted really well. He had Jerry Krause aligned the stars for Phil Jackson in a way which would allow him to flourish. Yeah. From a schematic perspective, like how you run the triangle. So he had the know-how to think of, Tex Winter's offense as being result-driven. So you have to give that up. The sustained success is the hard part, man. You have to have a guy like a Jordan who seemed to not be satisfied with one. And that's tough. It's tough. Like year in, year out, game in, game out, to want to repeat success is tough. It's really tough.
Must take its mental toll.
Yeah, and so what Jordan is doing kind of internally, finding these, slights or inventing these slights and motivations, you have to somehow find that for Phil to do. So Phil, one of the things that is in the documentary, but Phil would give each player a book to read every year, mm-hmm. Specifically for that player, to try and help them internalize their kind of inner journey that year. So Phil's knowledge of little things like that can be a driver are huge to find motivation for players. Yeah. So I think that's the toughest part and the genius of Phil, and I think if you can do that, you can kind of have that sustained success.
So one final question then, touching on Jerry Krause, he made it clear before the start of that final season that this was going to be Phil Jackson's last season, regardless what happened, and with that. Him and the owner, Jerry Reinsdorf, are almost portrayed as sort of pantomime villains for breaking up the team in the way they did and when they did. What's your take on that? Do you think they were right to do that? Because obviously we saw Jordan I think it was in the final episode, he was convinced that if every member of that team just signed on for one more year, they could have made it 7.
It's easy for Jordan to say that when he was earning 32 million that year.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah,
you got you and you earn 2 million, and the Houston Rockets are offering you 25